My wife regrets following the inspiring advice to make our marriage open. I am here to seek advice on what I can do to save what's left of my marriage. Let me start by saying that we have been married for 5 years, and we have been together for 7 years. To maintain confidentiality, I will call us James and Skylar. We met in our second year of college. I am now 26 years old, James is 27, and we plan to become a real family this year. Both of us dreamed of having 4 children, ideally 2 boys and 2 girls. We had a very happy marriage, and our families loved us both. Now, here is where I went wrong. I had what is sometimes called a work husband. This means a close, platonic relationship between colleagues. In my case, it was a courier who delivered orders to our office. To maintain confidentiality, we'll call him Jaden. He is 25 years old, single, and has been delivering packages to our office for nearly 2 years. From the moment we first met, there was chemistry between us, not necessarily romantic, but undeniably strong. I was drawn to him, and every time he made a delivery, we talked for at least 10 minutes. I eagerly awaited his arrival, and always stayed nearby when he came. One day, our conversation went further than usual. Jaden said he wanted to ask me a personal question. He warned me that it would be very personal, and didn't want to offend me or jeopardize our work relationship. I replied that, of course, he could ask anything. Jaden said, "I feel a very strong attraction to you, and I would like to know if you feel the same way." His boldness surprised me. Although I felt a bit awkward, I gathered my thoughts and told him the truth, that I indeed felt the same way. Jaden admitted that he would have asked me on a date if I weren't married. I thanked him for the compliment, and that was the end of our conversation. He left, and that was that. The following week, our exchanges were brief and awkward when he came to deliver packages. This bothered me, and I felt guilty for possibly crossing a line in our communication. At home, however, James and I enjoyed our family life. Let me clarify immediately. I was always completely satisfied with James as a lover, friend, and husband. I believed he would say the same about me. He was perfect for me. Nevertheless, I began to daydream about how wonderful it would be to have both my loving husband and a relationship with Jaden that went beyond work conversations. Later, I learned that some people actually practice this kind of arrangement. I started researching the topic and came across several articles about polyamory and open marriages. These ideas seemed foolish and disgusting to me, so I didn't think about them for long. I also knew that my husband would never agree to such a thing. Even if he did, it could destroy our marriage, and both of our families might stop communicating with us. That was something I absolutely didn't want. Weeks passed, and my family life was as wonderful and strong as ever. But I kept thinking about establishing a connection with Jaden. I began researching the topic again and stumbled upon an online post titled, "There's No Harm in Asking." It was a blog written by a woman who claimed to be in a successful open marriage. She wrote about how much she loved her husband but also wanted to have a relationship with a man she had met during volunteer work. The blogger said she didn't know how to discuss this with her husband without ruining their marriage. She kept these feelings to herself for over 2 years until one day, during a long car ride, she decided to ask him. To her surprise, he showed interest. In short, they made their marriage open. Now, both of them have partners outside their relationship whom they see 3 to 4 times a month. The blogger claimed they had been living this way for 4 years. Their marriage became stronger, and they both became happier than ever. Her story caught my attention because it was exactly what I wanted, but was afraid to ask my husband. Then, one Sunday morning, while we were relaxing at home, sitting on our phones and chatting, I decided to bring up the topic and ask him directly. I said, I just read a post online about open marriages. What do you think about it? He asked if I was talking about couples sleeping with other people. I confirmed and asked again what he thought about it. He replied that he thought it was disgusting, and that people should just get divorced if they wanted to sleep with someone else. I said it's becoming very popular here in the US and in many Western countries. Jane's facial expression clearly showed how revolted he was by the mere thought of it, so I quickly changed the subject. Based on his reaction, I decided never to bring it up again, as the last thing I wanted was to risk our great marriage. A week passed, and one evening James and I were lying in bed, enjoying intimacy. After a great moment together, I was lying on his chest and couldn't see his face when he suddenly asked, "Who were you thinking about when you mentioned open marriage last week?" I flinched, and my stomach clenched. Slowly lifting my head, I looked at him and asked, "What are you talking about? What do you mean?" James explained that he had read articles online stating that if a woman mentions open relationships, she has either already cheated on her partner or has someone in mind. His words shook me to my core. James noticed the impact of his words and said, "I know you too well. I can see you're hiding something. So be honest." I fell silent, looked away, and then said that I had never cheated on him and never would. I could have stopped there, but I didn't. I confessed that if we ever considered an open marriage, I had a friend at work in mind. James said, "Tell me about this friend from work." I began telling him about Jaden and our interactions up to that point, including the fact that Jaden had shared his feelings with me. However, I didn't mention that I had reciprocated his feelings at the time. James' next words scared me. "You know, technically, you've already cheated on me." I got angry and stubbornly argued that this wasn't true. But he countered, "Yes, the relationship you have with this Jaden is called emotional cheating." I had never heard of that term before, so James explained it to me. The more he explained, the more irritated I became. James suggested that we end the discussion for the night, since he needed to get up early the next day. He quickly fell asleep, but I couldn't. Instead, I picked up my phone and began researching emotional infidelity. After reading numerous articles and posts, I realized James was right. What I had with Jaden was dangerously close to emotional infidelity. No, let me clarify. It was full-on emotional infidelity. I felt terrible, as if I had betrayed my husband. Unable to sleep, I got out of bed, went downstairs, and made myself some tea. I eventually fell asleep on the couch around 4 a.m. Around 6:45 a.m. James woke me with a kiss, saying he was leaving for work and that I should get up since it was almost 7 a.m. As usual, I responded to his kiss and told him I loved him, but this time with a special sincerity. My thoughts were clouded with feelings for Jaden. Several days passed, and one evening after intimacy, James suddenly said he would be willing to try an open marriage if I really wanted it. This caught me off guard, and I asked, "Why are you bringing this up now?" He explained that he had been thinking about our conversations, and decided that we should try it while we're young if it's something we truly want. I expressed interest but swore never to put our marriage or our love at risk, as he was the most important person in my life. James replied, "If our bond is strong, it will withstand infidelity." I countered that a mutual open marriage wouldn't be considered infidelity, since we would both agree to it. Instead, he simply said, "Consider our marriage open starting now." I was shocked again and insisted that we not rush into it, saying that we needed to establish certain rules. He clarified that his only conditions were as follows. First, we must inform each other in advance about who and when we plan to sleep with. Second, we must share what happened, but without excessive details. Third, protection must always be used in all forms of intimacy without exception. I agreed to his conditions and suggested adding a few more points. Fourth, we would keep our open marriage a secret. And fifth, we would promise each other that these extramarital relationships would not destroy our marriage and that we would stay together. James stated that he could not agree to these points. When I asked why, he simply replied that he didn't want to and wasn't willing to discuss it further. I felt very uneasy, as this was completely unlike James. But I snuggled up to him, and we fell asleep. After these discussions, I was left with an anxious feeling about the whole idea of open relationships, as if James had hidden motives. For the next month, I didn't try to bring up the topic of open relationships, and we lived as usual. During this time, I kept my distance from Jaden at work, limiting our conversations to short and trivial topics like the weather or how we were doing. However, one day Jaden said he missed our conversations and asked what had happened. I replied that I was busy at work and home and didn't have time to talk. The thought crossed my mind about whether I should tell him about our open marriage, and I decided I should. How I now regret making that decision. A conversation about this didn't seem appropriate in the office, so I invited him to meet for drinks after work, to which he agreed. We met at a local bar with an outdoor terrace, perfect for the warm spring weather. I told him about our open marriage and directly asked if he was interested in a relationship with me. Without hesitation, he said yes. He mentioned that he had been waiting for me to make the first move and hadn't pushed earlier out of respect. However, he admitted that he had been dreaming about me for months. Most of our conversation that evening was flirting. It was a Tuesday, and we agreed to meet the next day for our first romantic encounter at his place right after work. I made it clear that I had to leave by 6:30 p.m. to get back home to my husband, who remained my top priority. That evening, I returned home and made a delicious dinner for James. After dinner, I told him about my conversation and meeting with Jaden earlier that day, as well as the fact that we had planned a date at his place the next day, provided James was still okay with the idea of an open marriage. I noticed James seemed surprised, but he responded, "Ah, okay, so you're meeting him tomorrow." I confirmed but reassured him that we could still cancel it because he and our marriage were my top priorities. He insisted, "No, let's do this." We hugged, but I felt tension and detachment in his embrace, which I chalked up to nerves. That evening, we hardly talked because he was busy working in his office, and I had my own tasks to handle. When we went to bed, I tried to cuddle up to him and initiate intimacy, but he said he was too tired and needed rest. The next morning, when I woke up, James was already gone. He had left a message saying he had an early meeting he'd forgotten to tell me about, and that he would see me in the evening. This was unlike him, but I didn't dwell on it and went about my morning, preparing for work. That day, I chose an especially cute outfit, knowing I'd be meeting Jaden right after work. During the day, I texted James, but he didn't respond. I began second-guessing my decision to meet Jaden. As I share this story with you now, I deeply regret not canceling the meeting. At 4:17 p.m., I received a text from James. He wrote that he loved me and that we'd see each other in the evening. This message reassured me and felt like a green light for my meeting. Getting to the point, Jaden and I met, and the sexual experience was great, though not as fulfilling as with James, and certainly devoid of any love. However, it was thrilling due to the feeling of forbidden passion. I left his place after about an hour and a half, returning home a little after 6:40 p.m. To my surprise, James wasn't home yet. This worked in my favor, as it gave me time to shower and put my clothes in the laundry to remove Jaden's cologne scent. I didn't want James to smell it. Although I was physically satisfied, I felt a deep sense of guilt, shame, and regret and felt dirty. I was battling internal turmoil and feeling nervous. I decided to quickly prepare a nice dinner for James and lit candles to create a romantic atmosphere. I wanted to show him how much I loved him and demonstrate that my physical connection with Jaden meant nothing to me. It was purely physical and couldn't compare to the love and intimacy I shared with James. I hoped we'd end the evening making love. I know some of you may think this is selfish or even disgusting, but keep in mind that I used protection with Jaden, and there was no exchange of bodily fluids. At 7:30 p.m. James still wasn't home, so I tried calling him, but the call went straight to voicemail. I then texted him, letting him know I was home and waiting with dinner. He didn't reply. By 9:50 p.m., I started getting worried. I kept calling and leaving messages. Around 9:30 p.m., I finally received a message from him. "Don't wait up for me. I'll be late." I replied, asking where he was and who he was with, but he didn't answer. Exhausted, I fell asleep after midnight, but woke up to the sound of the shower running in the guest bathroom. I went to find out what was happening. The door was locked, which was completely unlike James. I knocked, but he didn't respond. After about 10 minutes, James came out, wrapped in a towel, and said, "Hi, how was your evening?" I replied that it was fine, but he immediately asked, "Did you sleep with Jaden?" I asked him not to use that phrasing but admitted that yes, Jaden and I had been together. Then I asked where he had been. He said he had spent the evening at bars dancing. I asked him who he was with since I could smell women's perfume on his clothes. I asked, "Who is she?" He replied that since they hadn't slept together, he wasn't obligated to tell me who she was. I can't repeat his exact words, but I'll say that he used profanity for the first time while talking to me. His tone and choice of words alarmed me. I then asked why he had used the guest bathroom, and he said he'd be using the guest bedroom and bathroom until I took 2 STD tests. His words shocked me, and I said that wasn't part of our rules. I made sure Jaden used protection in everything we did. James countered, "Have you never heard of HPV or herpes, which can be transmitted orally? I won't come closer than 2 meters to you until you get tested." I was incredibly upset, crying, and told James that I didn't want an open marriage anymore. James retorted, "Too late. You had your chance. Now it's my turn." Devastated, I kept crying, but he calmly stated that he was going to bed because he had an early meeting and needed rest. I spent most of the night crying and eventually fell asleep on the couch. When I woke up, James was already gone. He had left me a message saying not to wait for him. I tried calling, but he didn't answer. I sent messages and left voice notes, but he still didn't reply. I felt terrible, like I was losing my mind, thinking I had destroyed our marriage. That day, there were no deliveries at the office, so I didn't see Jaden. But at 4:30 p.m., I called him and asked if we could meet that evening. He agreed, noting that I sounded upset, and I confirmed that I was, promising to explain when I arrived. We met, and I told him I wanted to end our relationship, admitting that it had been a huge mistake because I loved my husband and wanted to be with him alone. I explained the situation, and he understood. The only thing he asked for was one last meeting, after which he would never communicate with me again except for work matters. I agreed, and we had a very brief sexual encounter. Afterward, he said, "That was awful. You just lay there like a log." I apologized, admitting that this whole situation had been a huge mistake and that it wasn't his fault. I hugged him for the last time and left. Before I left, Jaden said, "I'll never understand women like you." I asked what he meant, but he simply replied with an expression of utter disdain on his face. "Nothing. No comment." I quickly left, crying the entire way home. How could I have been so stupid? I ruined my marriage. For what? I thought I was the dumbest person in the world and felt dirty again. James came home at midnight. I felt awful knowing that I had destroyed my life with my own hands. On Friday, James did the same, left before I woke up, and sent a message saying not to wait for him. This distance and coldness were tearing me apart. I loved spending time with him in the mornings, evenings, and weekends, cooking meals for him, hugging, taking walks after dinner, talking about random things. All of that was gone, and I missed it terribly. I texted James saying I wanted to talk to him in the morning, and he replied, "Okay, but only briefly because I'm leaving for the entire day." I asked where he was going, but he didn't answer. He came home at 1:30 a.m. I didn't say anything, just lay in bed crying. He took a shower and went straight to sleep. I woke up early to wait for James to get up. At 7 a.m., he came into the kitchen and poured himself some orange juice. The atmosphere was cold and distant. He didn't look at me and just sat at the table, staring at his phone. I got up, approached him, and sat on his lap, saying, "Look at me!" He looked away, but I repeated, "Look at me!" gently taking his face in my hands. Gazing into his brown eyes, I told him that I loved him with all my heart, that I had made a bad decision, not a mistake, but a bad decision. I said I was sorry, and would do everything to regain his trust and love. He said nothing, just looked at me like I had lost my mind. I asked him if he loved me, but he didn't respond. I pleaded, "James, please answer me." He replied, "I don't know." I burst into tears and said, "I can fix this." He responded, "I don't think you can." Then I called him a bastard and accused him of setting me up to divorce me. He denied it but admitted that as soon as I mentioned open marriage, he figured our marriage was likely over based on what he had read. I asked him why he hadn't just stopped me and demanded that I cut all ties with Jaden. He said, "You can't force someone to be faithful. Either they are or they aren't. And clearly, you're not monogamous." I just cried and begged him not to leave me. He said nothing, got up, and declared that he was leaving. I asked where he was going, and he replied that he'd be back after midnight. I reminded him that tomorrow was Easter, and we were supposed to leave at 7 a.m. to go to my parents' house. My family adores James, and we spend almost every holiday with them, since his parents now live in another state. He told me he wasn't going. I was shocked and devastated, begging him to come with me. He coldly replied, "No." I asked what I should tell my parents, and he said he didn't care, adding, "Just tell them the truth." I begged and pleaded with him to stay home with me, but he simply got dressed, grabbed a duffel bag, and walked out of the house. I'm completely broken and feel utterly empty. I'm seeking your advice. What can I do to save my marriage? I would really like to hear from people who have gone through something similar in open marriages, and to find out if a couple can recover from such betrayal. I'd like to hear stories from those who have successfully rebuilt their relationships after an open marriage. Thank you for listening to my story. I'm going back to bed to cry. I want to thank everyone who responded with feedback and support. It truly helped me get through the past few days. Many people justifiably criticized me and called me unpleasant names, but I deserved it, and I appreciate your comments. Easter Sunday and the following day were incredibly difficult for me, the two worst days of my life. I went to my parents' house, and the first thing they asked was, "Where is James?" I lied and said there was an emergency at work and he couldn't come. I said this because I didn't want to ruin the family event. My family believed this story, but their suspicions grew throughout the day because I wasn't texting or calling my husband as I usually do. To throw them off, I sent a few fake messages, pretending I had received replies from him, and told everyone he was still busy at work and would call me tomorrow. The truth is, he didn't call or text me even once to ask how I was doing, which broke my heart. I planned to stay overnight at my parents' house and tell them about our marital problems on Monday. I was terrified because I knew they would be furious and hate me. Well, I told them, and it went exactly as I expected. They yelled, called me terrible names, said they didn't raise me this way, and more. They called my sister over, and she joined in reprimanding me. I cried and apologized to them. I said I knew what I did was terrible, that I realized my mistake, and I would never repeat it again. I told them that my only goal in the foreseeable future was to regain James' trust and love. In the end, although they were very upset, they said they loved me and would pray that our marriage could be saved. On Monday evening, I returned home. Throughout the day, I called and texted James, but he didn't respond. When I got home, I found a note on the table. He wrote that he had gone to Florida to visit his parents and would return on Sunday. I felt awful because we had planned to go visit them together in early May, and now, because of me, that wasn't going to happen. I hate myself. That's all I can say right now. I feel incredibly depressed and sad. What scares me the most is that I'm no longer crying. The pain and regret are so deeply rooted inside me that tears have become powerless. Second update. Almost a year has passed, and I didn't plan to write again, but due to people's interest, I decided to do it. So, I have bad news and good news. Let's start with the bad. I am divorced. The divorce was finalized in December. In the end, James decided he couldn't stay married to me after I was with another man. He said he could never trust me again, and that he felt ashamed to be seen with me in public. He believes the divorce restored his masculinity. I disagree because he never lost it, and no one outside our family knows about my brief relationship with Jaden. But fine, let him think that. Now for the good news, or rather, excellent news. James and I started seeing each other again last month. We reconnected on Valentine's Day, and it was incredible. We see each other only when he wants to, which is about once a week, but the level of passion is off the charts, much higher than when we first started dating 7 years ago. He made it clear that this is purely a physical relationship and that we will never be married, live together, or be a full-fledged couple again. I've accepted this, well, not entirely, but I'm willing to go along with it. My goal is to win James back, and if I can't, I want to have children with him. Don't get me wrong, I would never use a child as a trap. I just want to have children with this man. I've thought through how we could share custody and make it work without being married. I know this sounds crazy, but I love him and don't want children with anyone else. I realize this will likely jeopardize any potential relationships with another man, but I don't want anyone else but James. That's all I can share for now, and I probably won't write again unless something significant happens. But I would love to hear your thoughts on my situation. Do you think I'm crazy for continuing to see James? Should I just try to move on, find new love, and build a family with someone else? P.S. Jaden is not an option and never was. He was just a mistake I made, and I'll never repeat it again. Thank you for listening to my story. Please share your thoughts on everything I've shared. Take care.